Hi again, everybody. This is Jerry Serino of From the Median Podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Please go to fromthemedian.org and connect with us there. Also, any of the social media sites for Cleveland Right to Life, you can find us there. Follow us on all the different social media and YouTube as well. We're everywhere, as we should be, because this is a great fight we have. I'm really very excited for my guest today, who's been on my show a couple of times already. So now this is the third time, and it's very the timing is intentional here for having him on. My guest is Dr. Michael Schwartz. He actually is the author of two books. I have him here: Fauci's Fiction and Vaccine Fiction. So you could, I think, guess why he is on and why he is on now. So, Dr. Schwartz, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jerry. I got a third book out too. It's
Do
called
you?
The Only Way to Save America, Trump 2.0, The Battle for Common Sense. That came out in 2025. Yeah. So
Oh,
I
sweet.
know it's been a while. We got to get together more often, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and by the way, please, and I'm not just, this isn't a shameless plug. I've read both, and both books are really, really good. Not just informative and with great information, but they're well written, and they're books that you will get through very quickly, like I did. So, I would highly suggest to my audience, go get these books. It will
I
also
appreciate that.
arm you with great information, as will this discussion. So let's first and foremost, for those that don't know, quick background on you. You're welcome. Anyone listening is welcome to go listen to the older episodes with Dr. Schwartz. But just in case, give us a quick background, and then we'll get into what happened in the last week or so.
Sure. Entrepreneur, 33 years. I'm a business owner. I own medical clinics. I'm also a private pilot. I've consulted on about 55 different campaigns, worked on 3 presidentials. I've got a couple degrees. I got a doctorate in business administration. I'm actually in law school right now, getting my law degree. I've got a lot going on. So I've been around
Yep.
the block a bit. But in context for this, I was the first guy literally to do a COVID test in the state of New Jersey. We were the only ones doing it for probably about a month. And that happened because of happenstance. We practiced good medicine before that. We used things called RPPs, which are respiratory pathogen panels. And one of the labs that I had worked with, coincidentally, was one of the first 30 in the nation to get FDA approval to do the testing. So we were first on the ground when everybody was begging to get a nasopharyngeal suck up their nose. And it was a little surreal that we're 6 years away from that now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy. And so that's a lot of what you talk about in your books, and about all of your experiences and what you saw and what you found, and hence the name of the first book, Fauci's Fiction, which again, he was on, Dr. Anthony Fauci was on at a congressional hearing, and he pled the fifth 111 times. I think that's the number that I got. You were also at the White House just recently, just visiting and doing some things. So let's first, start with what you saw when you saw all these questions and everything going on around Fauci.
Well, look, it's kind of apropos. What's funny is that everything I wrote in the book is what I was telling patients for 6 straight years. Well, really 3 years, and we were testing consistently. You got to remember, we had 19,000 patients, did 44,000 tests. So while we were going through all this, the data that we were collecting, and that's what Fauci's Fiction is about. You know that it's not about Fauci; it's about what we saw on the ground. How masks work, how testing works, because we wanted to put it in perspective. What I found interesting about the interview, or the congressional hearing with him, and I'm going on all these interviews, national television, they're going, well, what do you think? I'm going, well, it's kind of a mess to think that I was right the whole time, that,
Yeah.
we were right from day one. And I kept asking the question, Jerry, why, if I know what I know from, a couple hundred patients to start, how come he doesn't know this? And why are they not listening to us? Then I found out it was vanity. It was the fact that he cared more about hanging out with the stars. He's talking to Barbara Streisand, Joan Baez, and he's writing this diary because I guess he wanted to write a book. But meanwhile, you kept the charade going for so long because you love the attention. That's the answer. We all thought it was money. Maybe there was, other forces at work, deep state, this, that you name it. But it was really his own vanity, his personal, need to have that attention after all these years in the position he was in, doing a couple interviews here and there. But now all of a sudden he's a rock star, and he wanted to keep that going. That's really disappointing considering, like, when I run you through the actuality of what people went through, because everybody's got their personal story. I've seen it on a bigger, on a broader scale.
Yeah.
I've seen it where, where individuals were not allowed to have birthday parties at nursing homes, where I've literally watched while we were doing testing, while there was a dozen people outside in the cold with a cake through a window, where Mildred is inside having her 90th birthday because they were separating people. And then later, 6 months later, Mildred died without the comfort of her family by her side because the governor said you can't congregate. I've watched that over and over. I've watched people not be able to attend funerals. I've watched beyond, your kid not going to school and you being forced to wear a mask. Like, I have seen the horrors of what that whole draconian, thing did to our nation, nonetheless the world. So, having him come up there and not answer questions after literally not meeting a camera the guy's never liked in his entire life. Now he's shy. Come on, Jerry. It's the whole thing
Yeah.
is just a farce.
Yeah, what was frustrating too beyond that is the complicity of the media, right? I mean, they simply went along with everything. Now, on one hand, they could say, "Well, we were lied to as well," or we were going by what the experts said." But they also, on the other side, is they're reporters, they're media. They should be vetting these things, questioning these things. And you had answers, right? There were plenty of people who were at very least asking questions, and at best, as you did, is you had evidence. So the media seemed to be just as, in a sense, complicit. Would you agree?
I say that all the time, that the media is culpable. I mean, you got to love that term, experts, right? The media is
Yeah.
talking to experts. Well, when you want to talk to the guy who's got a couple thousand patients under his belt to tell you like his mortality rate, who's getting sick, what are the symptoms, what are you treating with? How, Mike, have you not lost one patient out of 19,000? How is that possible when we're watching TV thinking everybody's on a vent and dying? What's going on
Mhm.
here, Mike? What you think anybody would just ask the question? No one would ask. But of course, when we went to try to tell people that, we were met with resistance. Like that, to me, that just baffled me. I understand politics very well. As I said, I've worked on 55 races. I've either been campaign manager, senior advisor, you name it. I've done everything in politics. And I get that. But when you have people being forced to mask up, forced to, not take holidays, not gather, not go to funerals, the stuff we just discussed, when you have that much going on during a pandemic where you're controlling people's lives, you think that people would say, hold on a second, let's hear what this guy has to say. But nobody did that. And that is a product of the media. What you mentioned, they are 100% culpable, going along with their experts, the narrative they wanted to hear, purporting what they thought was right because it fit a narrative on a certain political side, maybe because it hurt President Trump at the time. We can look at that and talk about that. But what it also did, Jerry, was it really destroyed the future of medicine. And in this country. I was just having a discussion with somebody in the medical community talking about how people really have a lot of misinformation. We have actually regressed in the medical community. You have doctors who went right back to practicing the way they did before COVID, but they haven't learned anything. They've actually gotten worse. It's dumber now in medicine, and it's frustrating to people like us who want progress. We want, and I don't mean that in a political way. I mean, we want to move forward in medicine because there are things we should be learning from the data we collected to change the way we practice medicine, but we're not quite doing that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're getting a lot of that discussion in regards to the childhood vaccine, and I'm not here to talk about that per se. I'm not an expert in that, and I'm not going to say that don't take childhood vaccine or do or whatever. I'm not educated enough. But the mere fact that people are questioning it, it's understandable, right? It's understandable, like you said, that people are saying, "Oh, I don't know. I got to check now. Yeah, my doctor says this, but my doctor also told me to take the COVID vax."
Right.
Right. So, I mean, it's understandable that people would question, and I can't blame them. And there's done such great harm. So, um, let's talk about a little bit of some of the biggest lies, or maybe not lies, because Fauci didn't answer anything, so he didn't lie,
No,
nor did he tell the truth per se.
we've uncovered lies though. When you look at
Right.
the diaries, I mean, the
Right. So
biggest.
that's my
Sure.
question then. What are some of the things that you saw as the biggest things that are, it's hard to refute, that
The biggest
he
one, the biggest one is the mortality rate. I keep telling people, because I had to talk people off a ledge. I want to put, you have to understand perspective. And that was the first chapter in Fauci's fiction, because I wanted people to understand where I was coming from. You got to think about walking into this, oh my God, there's a pandemic going on. What do we expect? We're masked up. We're PPE'd up testing people because we didn't know what to expect. And what we found in the first 4 weeks was that all the patients that we had, whether they were 12 or 75 or 95, they were all recovering. And we measured COVID differently than most people. So when we had those metrics based on the way we measured it, we predicted the mortality rate of COVID in April of 2020. This is like, I started testing on March 16th of 2020. So put that in perspective. 4 to 6 weeks later, I said to my staff, my patients, my friends, my family, look, the mortality rate of this thing is going to be between 0.01 and 0.02%. Lo and behold, he knew that. He wrote about it in his book, but he didn't want to tell anybody because he wanted to keep this facade going. He was on television saying this is 10 times worse than the flu. Now, I would always say to my patients, we wouldn't lock the world down for a very bad flu season if you understood it that way and put it in perspective. So that's the biggest one, because that kept the fear on. That kept people wearing the mask, getting the shots, thinking they were going to die. That was one thing. The natural immunity thing drives me nuts too, because, we were trying to explain, once you have COVID, you get these B and T lymphocytes, the 27 proteins that are inside COVID that are novel. And when you first get it, your body's going to react a little weird because they've never seen these proteins. But once you had it, you're essentially immune. Now, we didn't know how long natural immunity was going to last at the time. Mine personally was 18 months before I caught it a second time. And I'm out testing folks, in their homes and things. So that worked well for me. But everybody's a little different. Depends on your IgG and how long that lasts, and your B and T lymphocytes, and of course the mutation of the spike protein, because that's what you're getting sick from the next time when it fools your body to get in. So there's all this sciencey stuff that we really should have been telling everybody, that he knew but wasn't telling everybody. He just kept repeating the phrase, trust the science. Meanwhile, he wasn't explaining the science, but when you read the diaries, he knew quite well what I knew. He just didn't want to tell everybody. While I was trying to talk people off a ledge and end the lockdowns, end the insanity, get everybody to calm down and see this for what it was, he was trying to hide that from you by keeping up the hype. So that, to me, is the biggest lie. If anybody's culpable, I mean, I had a viewer compare him to Hitler the other day on the amount of people that have been killed. If you think about it in that context, I mean, you are really culpable for people's lives. And that, to me, is just sad. For the fact that, he's got a federal pardon now. I see states want to go after him. But Jerry, you ask about the lies. It's just one after the other. But the totality of that big lie is what cost the American people, the world, most of their lives that period.
Yeah, for sure. So talk about the mortality rate. So I had questions very early on and was censored. And I'm not an expert. I'm not someone who had the experience you have. I questioned whether or not people are dying from COVID. Some people probably did, because people die from the flu, your complications of the flu. So tell me about that, and segment out adults, healthy adults mortality versus elderly mortality versus children.
So there's a lot to break down. It really comes back to the way we analyzed our data. We look at COVID. I know you know this from reading the books, but a lot of people, I'm still having this argument with people because they haven't been told the truth yet. There's a lot you don't know about COVID, even though you think you do. But we looked at COVID very differently. When we started analyzing the data, we looked at a couple things. COVID is not just negative or positive. It's either negative or positive with caveats. So you can't just look at a COVID patient and say, oh, they're dead, they have COVID. Well, did they have a co-infection? That was the most important thing. The sickest of the sick, we always found, always had a co-infection. Usually it was Staph aureus, sometimes Klebs, sometimes Haemophilus influenza, you name it. But we test for 31 things. So when you had sick people, really sick people, most of the time they were fighting COVID and a bacterial co-infection. One lady had COVID and a viral. She had a flu A at the same time she had COVID. So you have to know what you're diagnosing. So when you're saying, did they die of COVID? Most of what you're hearing out there, they weren't looking for co-infections. We were also measuring CT value. That's your viral load. We were also looking at comorbidity. But the one thing that we did that was really important was that we called every positive patient every single night to report the results, and we recorded the symptomology. And then we could compare that what their CT value and co-infection. So we could look at it in real time to figure out what people were actually getting sick from. Now, what we found is the R naught is so large in COVID that it's such a small particle. You could fit 100 million on a pinhead. And if you think about that number, you can't really fathom it. That means everybody had it. And I can prove that because when we first started testing, if you remember in Fauci's fiction, we did a 441 home sample size. That was who we saw when everybody was locked down. We were going to homes. And when someone had it who was symptomatic in a house, everybody had it. But only about 10 to 15% of the people who had it in that grouping actually had what we call classic symptoms, classic symptomology. Most people didn't realize that the most common symptom of COVID was a headache from hemoglobin uptake issues. But these are common with all coronaviruses, all pathogens like the flu. Most of the time, if it hasn't replicated, it's not destroying the mitochondria of your cells where you're developing classic symptomology. You're getting maybe a little rundown, a headache. You feel like, oh, maybe something's coming on. You've had those days. And then 2 days later, it's not there. And you went, oh, it must have been nothing. You were probably fighting a pathogen, but you're relatively healthy. So you fought it off. So that when you look at the CT value and the viral load, and if they do have a co-infection or not, you can start to figure all this out in real time. And that's what we did. So when you ask about the mortality rate, I had 19,000 patients. I didn't lose one. My mortality rate is 0. Now, my hospitalization rate, we only had 4 patients out of the 19,000 go to the hospital. So figure that out. My rate is so low. And we also only treat it with vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, and electrolytes. But you got to remember something important about my patient population, because you got to put it in perspective. Sick people go to the hospital. I'm not in a hospital. I'm running a clinic where sometimes sick people came, but I'm also out there testing police officers, nursing homes, because we had to do that weekly. So we're testing people who are totally fine. Some of them would get sick later, but again, still out of the whole of the population, 4 hospitalizations and 0 deaths, my mortality rate's nothing. So when you start looking at that and figuring out like, well, did this guy, has got a comorbidity, is in the hospital and he died. Would he have died if not for the flu? Was it the actual cause? Was it also the proximate cause? We'll go to law school on you here, because that really is the key. If you were in the pool of population that could die in the next 5 years, a cold can bring you down, a flu can bring you down, a COVID can bring you down if you have all these comorbidities going on in your body. So the real mortality rate, look, if you are susceptible to something, try to stay in shape, eat right, sleep, take your vitamins, do all those things to stay healthy, because when one of these pathogens comes along, you could be like Jerry and I, who would fight it off in 2 days, or you could get run down to the point where it might cause some complications and you could later succumb to it. So, but that's kind of life, Jerry. It's the same as NL63 and OC43, but people haven't heard of those coronaviruses because they weren't exploited during a presidential election. So, mortality rate, you got to kind of figure it out, but it's about that of the flu.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And absolutely. A couple more things before we come to an end. Again, I'm on with Dr. Michael Schwartz. He's, I would call you an expert in COVID and everything COVID.
Careful. I don't like that
yeah,
word.
You don't want to be an expert. That's right. That's right. The expert doesn't carry the weight that it used to. Author of 3 books. Fauci's fiction, vaccine fiction, and then the third one was again?
The Only Way to Save America, Trump 2.0, The Battle for Common Sense.
Awesome. I do want to talk about that in a second, but the final area in regards to COVID in this area is we definitely blame Fauci, and he is to be blamed because he was sort of the mouthpiece. He had the information and so on, but there were also plenty of other people that had this information or had the ability to ask and get information. Who were those people, right?
Well, God, because he was shutting a lot down. He had that meeting with 12 people where 10 of them said, this looks like it's a lab leak and not zoonotic. And 2 people said, nah, zoonotic. He went with the 2 and not the 10. He went with the minority view and not the majority view. You had other people like Robert Redfield, who I highly respect, but he was trying to shut down him. When you have it's amazing that you can shut down other experts and then people like me in the field, with real patients in their hands. What you can just shut us down because you want this facade to continue. That's the kind of thing that irks me a little bit. But when other folks didn't push back as much, you had Birx there who's now saying, yeah, she was wrong on certain things. God, where were you back then, Deborah? You had so many people, and I feel like almost President Trump was a victim in this because here are his top experts. You go back to that word, and he's taking advice. He feels like, he's a populist president. He wants to do the right thing. Everybody always asks me about that Operation Warp Speed. And no other president would have done that in the time frame that he did it. So I have to give him credit in the context of how he did it. But he was getting bad advice the whole time. Meanwhile, he was rushing out a shot. I won't call it a vaccine that didn't work, and it was unnecessary. And then forced everybody to go get it. Not him, but of course the Biden administration for a year plus. Hospitals. My wife has damage now from this. There are multiple people in the world, have damage from this shot that they did not need. That did not work. I mean, isn't that the kind of the crux? I briefed Ron Johnson on the Hill about this, and I was explaining that to him, and he was kind of like, didn't want to hear it. He was beyond that. It was going down a rabbit hole somewhere. And I'm like, but you have to understand that the government and the media and medical experts were pushing a shot that wasn't designed to work like a traditional vaccine, and that you did not need if you had the real numbers of sickness, of mortality, of hospitalizations that we saw, not the ones they were purporting from on the news agencies. It's kind of amazing that everybody, including Congress, got fooled during this entire time.
Mm-hmm. I think many were willfully fooled, right? They wanted to go along with it. Okay, so the final area is your final book that we had talked about. Tell us a little bit about the book and sort of what motivated you to write it.
I've been involved in politics all my life. And, so Trump 2.0, we all have, great expectations for this administration. Some are happy, some are not, some are kind of in the middle. But what I wanted to do was write about policy, because that's kind of my expertise. Use that word again, but I've been involved for so long. I wanted to write about the tax code, why it didn't exist until 1913, why it's unnecessary. How could we replace that? That's probably will fix 90% of the issues in this country. We tried to test that with the tariffs, and then maybe we'll have to go to a VAT or a national sales tax. There's reasons for that, and I can get into it. I do in the book, but I talk about term limits. I talk about balanced budget amendments, zero baseline budgeting, real things that could actually fix the country, which I know President Trump wants to do. He's talked about them multiple times, but the resistance you're getting from people to actually fix the country is kind of amazing. I guess they like the status quo for a reason, Jerry.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's a lot that Trump is good at picking his battles, right? And sometimes maybe wanting to do certain things but just saying, hey, I could only do so much at one time. I think he would probably do all of that you had just talked about there. So what tell me real quickly, how was your time at the White House last week?
It's great. By the way, the Oval's beautiful. I love people that say, oh, it looks gaudy. I said, no, it looks great. And he did it so quickly, Jerry, so quickly. It looks amazing. I was, you can't really, it's funny when you're in the Oval and you're looking around, you're like, you can't kind of focus on one thing. You're because there's so much, and you're looking at, Reagan's portrait. You're looking at the little model he's got of the new Air Force One. Your eyes are just going. Then you're looking over at the Declaration, but he had it closed that day. Oh, I wish it was. Your eyes can't focus. And then when you go into the rest of the West Wing, I don't know if you've ever been there, but the Roosevelt is a lot smaller than it looks on television. Obviously, the cabinet room is just, it's kind of the one thing you notice in Trump's White House is he's actually a pretty good decorator. When everybody else thought he was like destroying it, it was going to be gone. It actually looks really nice. I will tell you this. I will give you a little a tidbit here, because this was funny. If you look at Trump's challenge coins, there's two sides. He designed it. One's the seal of the president. The other one has got his family crest on it with 45, 47. The front of it, which is the seal of the president. When you walk into the West Wing, it is now there's a whole bunch of them glued to the doors. And as you walk around, you're like, that's kind of odd, right? It's a challenge coin. And the staffer said to me, he goes, yeah, he was walking around personally super gluing them to the doors because he thought it looked good. So he hit every single door in the West Wing except the bathrooms. And the one thing I thought was funny when he did this, he's a regular guy. He's a jokester. Yeah. He went into Dan Scavino's office and he glued them like all over his office. And Dan Scavino thought somebody played a prank on him and didn't say anything. And at the end of the day, Trump said, it was me. I thought you needed a little something in there. Dan Scavino realized he was punked by President Trump, which I think is cute. But if you understand this guy, and if you talk to the folks that know him, his staff, the people that have worked for him for 20 years, he's a regular guy. He knows your family. He remembers almost everything. The guy, he's a genuine human being. He's not some entity that the media makes him out to be. Of course, he might enjoy that partially, but I mean, he is a funny, cordial, honest, just human being. And I wish people would see that more instead of trying to, create all this vitriol around a man who really doesn't deserve it. He really does love this country and wants it to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Michael Schwartz, for coming on as always and so quickly and on short notice. I really appreciate you. Your knowledge is exceptional. Everyone, please get the books. You will not regret it. So, Dr. Michael Schwartz, thanks for being here. I appreciate
Thank you, Jerry. My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank all of you for listening to this episode of From the Median Podcast. And we will see you next time.